Thank you. Welcome, welcome, welcome to all of you. Just for the beginning, I would ask you to turn off your phones so we can have this event without disturbance. And I and the entire team of Politik des Verdrängens, or Politics of Denial, worked very hard on putting this together. This all-female panel, it was very important for us. Yes. And I am super proud about these 4 amazing women that we were able to gather here for you in Hamburg tonight to engage in this important conversation. I am proud to present Hebh Jamal, American Palestinian journalist based in Germany, currently working on the important documentary film project, The Reason of State. And please, give a warm welcome. And we have Hadas Kedar, doctoral student for communication, studies at the University of Hamburg, and an activist with the Jüdische Stimme, or Jewish Voice for Peace, for just peace in the Middle East. Please give a warm welcome. Thank you. And then we have Greta Thunberg, who you all know, a climate activist, human rights activist, and the initiator of Fridays for Future. No? Okay. And lastly, we have Elisa Baş, climate justice activist and co-founder of BiPoC for Future. She is also active within the pro-Palestine movement. Give it up for Elisa. Yes. Yeah, that was what I was talking about. Maybe everyone can go double check. But this is our team. He is actually allowed to disturb us because we don't know what's going on behind. They're doing an amazing job to keep this all running. Yes, give it up for the team. So I want to welcome everyone in this room. Thank you for being here tonight with us. The topics we're going to tackle together tonight are complex, painful, and highly emotional. We will address Germany's historical responsibility towards the Palestinian people, as well as the Jewish people, and how narratives around these topics are shaped, how movements for human rights and climate justice are silenced, and how the truth can be distorted in the name of protection or control. So, taking into account how highly charged this moment and our topics today are, I want to invite you, in all sincerity, to really make an effort to listen and think with an open heart and an open mind. Those of you who are not yet familiar with topics around human rights, whether through the lens of climate justice or the Israel-Palestine history, I invite you to try to leave your prejudices behind, if only for just this evening. We want to hold a space where honesty, discomfort, and dignity can coexist, where we can name the harm and still believe in healing, where accountability doesn't mean punishment and shame, but asks us to connect, move with courage, and seek authentic ways of repair. We're here today to create a space for nuanced, courageous conversations, one that honors all human life and upholds the values of justice and safety for everyone. We've asked all panelists to frame their contributions in ways that don't generalize, dehumanize, or violate anyone's dignity. So to start with this panel and warm up and get to know everyone a little bit, we're going to start with 2 smaller questions that we will ask to everyone, so you get a chance to just connect to us. And I would invite you to shortly tell us about yourself, Just like a quick, dry background, professionally and educationally. Who are you? Maybe we start with you, Hebh.
Thank you very much for inviting me here today and being a part of and seeing so many people. Who am I? I mean, I'm Palestinian. Like, obviously that's something that I frame whenever I enter these spaces. But I'm also from the United States. So something that I actually resonate with, my introduction to activism, was not really about Palestine at all. So I was a student in New York City, and if you know anything about the education system in New York City, applying to high schools is like applying to college. And New York City has one of the most segregated school systems in the country. So I went to a high school that was a majority white high school, and I didn't really see a lot of Muslims, a lot of black and brown people, even though it was connected to a housing project. It was right behind a housing project. So through that, I sort of understood, okay, something's going on, something's different. And that's when I sort of realized that, no, this is a systemic issue that bars black and brown kids from entering quote unquote good schools. And mind you, this is all public schools, so it's not as if, I'm going to a private school. And so my introduction to activism and sort of defines my identity was really through education reform and education and justice. And through that, I realized the concept of me fighting for people, fighting for students, fighting for whoever it is, the concept of separating others, the apartheid of students or the segregation of students or the segregation of Palestinians, and physically removing one type of person from another type of person. And it was very, very easy for me to understand my own identity. My parents never really drilled into me that I'm Palestinian or have this whole history. I really sought my history for myself. That's just a very brief sort of introduction into activism and sort of what I do. But it was, for me, it was really through education reform that I understand how clearly horrific the situation in Palestine is.
Thanks. I'm Hadas. I was born in Israel, historic Palestine. And I grew up also very normative Zionist kind of education, family, not very political. And it was, the short story is that I studied art, and of course when you study art, you start reflecting on the world. When you study anything, actually, because the whole education that the Israeli system gives you is very, very limited. So I only started getting to know the world with the age of 20, I would say. And later with the age of 30, when I finally got out of Israel and went to study my MA studies in Denmark, I met a Palestinian man who was a little bit older than me. And we were talking because we were supposed to collaborate in some event. And he's from the West Bank. And we started sharing stories from Palestine in a way. And while talking to him, I figured, you're actually the first Palestinian person that I've ever talked to in the age of 31. Just this kind of realization struck me. I was already much more aware, as I said, in the decade beforehand about what is going on, but there are a lot of details that you don't know when you still live within the Israeli society. So this going outside of Israel was very helpful to rediscover, to just relearn the history of where I grew up. So that was very meaningful. And again, to make the long story short, it is very much since the 7th of October that I also started not only being activist with more behind the scenes things, but I started also to speak up in demonstrations, mostly here in Hamburg. And that's the short part. And I'm also working on my PhD here in communication studies. And That's the...
My name is Greta. I'm from one of the most privileged backgrounds anyone can be from, like white Swede. So when I grew up, I did not basically know anything about what was going on in Palestine because I wasn't taught. I think the first time I actually reacted in a way that, wait, actually, this is kind of fucked up, was when in school they were talking about the Israel-Palestine conflict, and the teacher presented one picture, of course, the usual both sidesism picture, and then there were some people with Palestinian background in the class, and they got very upset, and I was like, wait, this is... I think that was the first moment when I was like, wait a second, and then, which was insane that it was not until then that I started to realize things. But my way into activism was mainly through climate justice activism. When I learned about the climate crisis in school, when I was around like maybe 8 years old, when I was told to recycle paper and turn off the lights in room where you're not in, and like pull out the plugs if you're not using the chargers, for example. And I was like, if the problems that they're talking about are as serious as they're describing them as, if this is an existential crisis, then surely we would be taking more drastic steps than that. So I kind of got very curious and had to figure out more myself, because all the adults I was talking to were like, you shouldn't have to worry. Please don't worry. It was a very patronizing way of telling me to just don't think about it and just be like everyone else, and then everything will be fine, because they're more concerned about their kids being worried about the climate crisis than actually that we are facing an existential crisis that is threatening the very foundations of our life-supporting systems. But then I did my own research, and the more you read, the more you learn, the more you cannot unsee it, kind of. And then I was sort of stuck in a loop where I felt like I was going crazy because no one else around me took this seriously, no matter how many facts I presented to them, no matter how much I tried to argue with the logic that I thought everyone would, of course, buy, because it's logic. Like, we cannot continue living as if there's no tomorrow when there is a tomorrow. That was like basic common sense to me, I thought. So then out of, I think, frustration, I just decided, okay, well, if no one is listening, I'm just gonna have to do something myself. And then I started school striking for the climate back in 2018, and which then turned out to become a global school striking movement called Fridays for Future. Yeah, so that's kind of my background, I guess.
I live in Germany. I was born and raised in Hamburg, and for me it started also with a strong sense of responsibility. Just to live in Germany, even though my family was very poor, like related to other circumstances, and if you would compare, but I was living in Germany, one of the richest countries in the world, and also I had a safe roof over my head. I had warm food on the table. My parents managed it somehow. And I don't think anyone should take that safety for granted, especially if we have the time and the freedom to speak up against injustice. Like, this is the first thing what also like activated me, but it was also deeply personal. Like, when I think about my own experience, about my family experience, in my close family, someone had to flee, and I witnessed that what it means to be undocumented, to be illegalized in a country and criminalized somehow, and not knowing if you will be deported just because you break a bone and have to be in the hospital. Like, this is a really strong fear people got in this country also, and my family also got. So that experience, of course, shaped me and my view of the world. It made me understand that the violence of borders, the fear not to be belonging somewhere, and the importance also of defending the rights of those forced to flee, regardless of why they flee, is very, very important and essential. That's also what led me to learn more about Palestine, because most Palestinians are in fact refugees. Many of them not just once, but displaced multiple times. Some are even refugees in their own hometowns and villages. And there are hundreds of checkpoints, many of them cutting straight through Palestinian towns and villages. They separate families, isolate communities, and turn daily life into a logistical nightmare. So it's a system of control and fragmentation, and what was also a turning point for me was to learn about that it is, in fact, apartheid. I saw an interview, and it was, in fact, an interview with a former soldier, it was an Israeli occupation soldier in Hebron, and he described how he had and how he raided Palestinian homes at night, routinely, and terrorized the families and pushed them to leave. He showed how Palestinians have to climb from rooftop to rooftop just to get to a street where they're allowed to walk on. And those same streets are fully open to illegal settlers and also to European tourists, but deadly for Palestinians, in the West Bank also. And I remembered how shocked I was when I saw the interview and saw how it was described, because it was very, very clear for me that it is apartheid as I've learned it in school about South Africa. And I also remember how shocked I was in school learning about apartheid and how humanity could let that happen. I saw it, it happened again. And Germany was complicit again. Germany was supporting the apartheid regime again with everything they got. So that's why I knew I had to speak up, because injustice anywhere is, of course, a threat to us everywhere, not just because of the immediate harm there, which is brutal enough to the people, but because it normalizes the idea that people can be treated that way.
Okay. Lastly, I'm just shortly going to introduce myself, why I'm here and what's my background, so you know who's leading you through the evening. My name is Jasmin Malaika Peters, and I'm the founder of Germany Goes to Therapy. I am a psychosomatic pain coach and a hypnotherapist with a Bachelor of Science in Physical Therapy. And in my clinic work, I focus on treating complex chronic pain and help people break free from patterns that keep their brains stuck in the pain loop. And through my training in clinical hypnotherapy and neuroscience, I've come to understand how the media is used to manipulate our minds, programming us with stereotypes and narratives that uphold violent systems like white supremacy and patriarchy. And after October 7th happened, I started to see patterns emerge in the collective German discourse that I could recognize within my clients. I could see an overlap. And there is a similarity between a brain that is stuck in a chronic pain loop and a brain that is invested in denial. Both run on a faulty brain program. It's quite fascinating. And so within my project, Germany Goes to Therapy, I am researching on how I can use my skills as a pain coach and hypnotherapist to offer to this moment and to help people retrain their brains away from white supremacy and move from a propagandized brain to one that is firmly rooted in reality and truth, because we need that to combat authoritarianism. So this project is a social justice initiative that asks, what would true accountability and repair look like for Germans? What would it mean to actually heal from our history, not just individually, but as a collective and a society? And so through this sort of lens and background, we want to help understand the moment of how we are going through this oppression, how we're being silenced, how just speaking up for climate justice and speaking up for human rights and against an ongoing, extremely violent genocide, how that is being done to us and what we need to understand and learn in these mechanisms so we can combat and really protect us from that and still be effective in the fight against the authoritarianism that is taking hold all across the world. So in the beginning, we wanted to look at things through the term understanding gaslighting better, so to help us better make sense about what is going on. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview so everyone in the room is on the same page what gaslighting is, and then we will go into the individual experiences of all four panelists, how they have been gaslit by German politicians and public officials, and what has happened, how they are doing it, and how we can combat it, okay? Just quickly, what are we talking about when we talk about gaslighting? It happens when someone tells us that our feelings, memories, or perceptions aren't real. It's a direct attack on our ability to trust ourselves, designed to keep us silent or deeply insecure, so we won't have the courage to really speak up for ourselves or others. And how it sounds in everyday life is like, it's sentences like, why aren't you talking about other wars that are going on? This kind of whataboutism, we call this, always just derailing and talking about something else, and the point you just made is completely ignored. It's a very cheap tactic, but unfortunately it's quite, it works quite well. The other very common thing we hear is, you're holding Israel to a higher standard than any other country. And the truth is, that's actually not true. If any other country would be doing those, would be genociding, we would also talk about that as much. And it's very, those arguments are in bad faith, we say. Like, they're really just to silence and oppress. There's never anything of real merit when people speak like that. And so just to remember to really catch these things when they happen, it will empower all of us. So our goal today is to spot this in conversations, in the public discourse, and to understand how it's used to manufacture consent for authoritarian politics, and to then protect ourselves and others so we can push back. Let's start with Elisa this time, because we wanted to start first in the German movement and have what happened within Fridays for Future. And we wanted to start with you and then have Greta share her part, because those two actually belong together, right?
Yeah, I'm very grateful that I can share my experience here. Before I speak about my personal case and what happened to me individually, I want to be very clear, like in so-called progressive movements in Germany, it is very normal that an open debate on Palestine is not only avoided, it is clearly shut down. And I think that what I'm going to say and the structures I'm talking about within Fridays for Future Germany will be a good example for that. Like, I was active within Fridays for Future for about 3 years. And within Fridays for Future Germany, there was never an open democratic space for a real debate. The status quo was to shut down pro-Palestinian voices. So when Fridays for Future Bremen, for example, it is a local group, invited the group Palestine Speaks to their global strike in September 2022, and they were completely defamed in the press and the media as anti-Semitic, and they were completely let down by Fridays for Future Germany. What made it even worse is that there was no attempt at the dialogue. Luisa Neubauer, which is the prominent figure of Fridays for Future, never reached out to speak with Fridays for Future Bremen. Instead, she went to the media and gave them exactly what they were asking for: a confirmation that the group had made a mistake and that Fridays for Future was now in a process of not repeating anti-Semitism, all without any effort to understand their position on Palestine. So Fridays for Future Bremen was so heavily discredited that no greater alliance partner in Bremen was willing to work with them anymore. And after that, the group was completely isolated and eventually dissolved and refounded by clean Fridays for Future people, also from the federal level. As BiPoC for Future, we proposed an internal panel discussion on Palestine, because this was a topic which was like bubbling under the surface for years. And I was thinking about, we have to have a real debate on that. We have to make sure everyone hears the arguments. And like I proposed this internal panel for our members, bringing together a range of voices, even like including the Central Council of Jews, which is very Zionist, but also Palästina spricht, because I knew we got the better arguments. I was not feared of that. But the person I shared this idea with initially responded positively. She said, yes, that sounds like a good idea for the future. But then sabotage was followed. And it was exactly from this same person, I told. Behind our backs, she organized an anti-Semitism workshop for every local Fridays for Future group, which uses the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. Maybe we can talk about the IRA definition later on, but it is a definition which is highly controversial, also scientifically, because it's very vague, and it centers the Israeli state and the criticism on the Israeli state, and not the Jewish people and hatred towards Jewish people. So it's a very bizarre form of definition. And even its original main author, Kenneth Stern, distanced himself from it and said it is being misused to shut down pro-Palestinian voices, and this was never the idea. So it should not be used in academic and activist spaces. To make things really bad, the same group which uses the IRA definition also gave a crash course on the so-called Middle East conflict for the groups. So you can imagine what it looks like. If you start with beginning like criticism on Israel equals anti-Semitism, then you can think about like how this crash course on the Middle East conflict looked like, and that any Palestinian perspective is automatically framed as dangerous. So this was not about education, what we planned. It was about preventing the possibility to a transparent and democratic process, because this might lead to Fridays for Future Germany expressing solidarity with Palestine. So it had to be sabotaged. It had to be sabotaged and prevented with those kind of tactics. But what happened on this structural level also mirrors what happened to me personally. I was a spokesperson for Fridays for Future Germany, actually, also for climate strikes, global strikes we got. And I was also a spokesperson for the Fridays for Future Hamburg group. I was re-elected even. And then I was getting active because I told you about the story. I was like my awakening moment on Palestine also, and I was speaking about Palestine on my private Instagram account, and I was engaging with protests for Palestine, and I wasn't doing it as a spokesperson, I was doing it privately as a human, because I think it's important, and I was also doing with BiPoC for Future workshops on the interconnection between climate justice and Palestine. So, of course, I also connected those, but I wasn't doing it as a spokesperson from Fridays for Future, even though I was, the request from the press coordination on Fridays for Future shrank to 0. Within a few months, I didn't get any requests anymore, although I was elected in my group, so they were misusing also their power as a press coordination. And they were directing the greater requests to the both German and they are very near to the Green Party. They redirected all the greater requests, all requests to Germans, to the both Annikas, actually. They're called Annika. So I wasn't told why for months. I was just let down, and I wasn't told for months. I was ignored. And the answer was, after I was asking for several times why I'm not getting anything, we don't want to risk a shitstorm. So it was clear that it's about Palestine, and that even though I had never spoken, and I've never mixed up those things. But it became clear that the pro-Palestinian voices were systematically removed from the movement. And you were just erased from the visibility and influence. It was a very quiet tactic. It was very also hard to say that they're, to talk to someone about it, because it was a quiet removal. You were just made unwelcome, you were made unpopular, discredited, or ignore it until you leave. And it not only happened to me, but to many people. And of course, after the 7th of October, I spoke directly about the genocide, and I was involving with a protest, and then I had officially also a smear campaign against me from the Springer Press, from Bild, and it was on the 17th of October, 2023. And after this racist campaign, I was actually kicked out of Fridays for Future for a lifetime also. It was life sentence. And the most undemocratic thing about it is that they've never spoken to me about it. They've never asked me what I've done actually. They just believe the Bild comments. They just believe that. I didn't have one hearing in all this exclusion process. But they were hearing very many experts, external consultants, consulted with foundations, but not once did they even confront me where I was anti-Semitic or where I was anti-Jewish or something like that. So it was really gaslighting. It was just holding this accusation of anti-Semitism up and that not even talk about it anymore. It was so clear for everyone. So they did what they believed, what Bild typed, and what right-wing blogs also joyfully spread. This was, and I think, a great example of how exclusion works within those kind of movements. I hope it didn't take too much space now.
My experiences with FFF Germany in relation to FFF International, that's a topic I could rant about for. Yeah, I was just speaking bullshit. The things you were describing, the awful, horrible bullying and racist discrimination that you were describing, is not, unfortunately, unique within Germany. In the case of FFF Germany or in the global climate movement, just as a, I won't go into too much detail, but very similar things and similar patterns have obviously been happening on an international level as well, where, Fridays for Future is a global climate justice network, where, of course, we have many shared understanding of what we are standing up for. We are standing up for climate justice. We are standing up for human rights. We are standing up for the most basic values, you would think. But apparently in many cases, such as the extreme case of Germany, when it comes to Palestine, that is, as you all very well know, not the case. So especially after the 7th of October, when we became more vocal on Palestinian liberation, there was I don't even know how to describe this, but there were many attempts of FFF International of FFF Germany to discredit everything that FFF International were doing, or everything that prominent activists in different countries within FFF International were doing and were saying, and both internally with pressure, with issues of fundings, and but not also the least, of course, in the media and media campaign. And eventually FFF Germany went out and publicly stated that they distanced themselves from FFF International and me for saying that bombing people is bad, apartheid and occupations are bad, violating the most basic human rights, committing war crimes is bad, no matter which country you are. And since then, I have basically cut off all my contact to all activists within FFF Germany for obvious reasons. So that was a very brief explanation of that. I could talk about that for hours upon hours, but I'm not going to do that because that is way too boring. But of course, similar things have been happening in media as a whole, where, of course, what I experience is nothing compared to what POC, people and activists, especially with Palestinian backgrounds, are experiencing, specifically in the German context, if we're talking about that. But everything that you were mentioning are just standard behavior of German media and politicians and just generally outspoken people. But of course, it's not about anti-Semitism. It is about racism and about wanting to uphold a status quo where you are prioritizing being liked by the mainstream public rather than doing what is actually right or standing up to your values, putting that into practice. For example, in my case, something that just made it so very clear concretely was that often the same people who were accusing me of being controlled by a secret Jewish elite, which is incredibly anti-Semitic, often the very same people, individuals, then overnight said, she's an anti-Semite. Like, that just is one example showing how absurd this is and that there is absolutely no logic behind it. The arguments that they are using. Of course, then you become a villain in their eyes because you're not saying what they want you to say. For example, in my case, just because to share personal examples, I was seen as this small girl who was saying that, oh, we should save the planet. Like, anyone can get behind that we should save the planet. And then when we're talking about decolonization, maybe people don't understand that, but many people think that sounds good. When we are putting that in practice, because decolonization and climate justice is of course not a metaphor, then you are actually challenging the status quo by naming the problems like capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy, and then you are not likable or comfortable anymore. So then people want to silence you and want to exclude you. So since then, of course, there has been a very clear silencing in media and accusations from all possible angles, arguments that I couldn't even imagine, sentences I wouldn't even, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever, just to silence you and to scare you to stay in your lane where they want you to be. That's, like, for example, I would stop being invited to political events. I would be invited, but like almost every day, when they invited me to events, they would say, okay, you can talk, but you cannot talk about politics. First of all, how do they expect me to respect that? Second of all, what mindset do you have if you think that the climate crisis is not political, but basic human rights are too political and too controversial, we don't want to risk a shitstorm. In the case of activists within FFF Germany, for me it's just, I cannot comprehend, like, how can you, if you as an activist are an activist, but too scared of saying things that will make you look uncomfortable and will make people uncomfortable, then why are you an activist in the first place? if you claim to care about the climate crisis, but only care about the future of white children, because that's the narrative currently that's being the dominant narrative here, then how can you, then you should not be able to call yourself a climate activist, because if that's not pure racism, then I don't know what is. If we cannot recognize and sympathize with all the countless of colonized and oppressed people today, then there's no justice to be talked about. And I also want to address that recently we have seen some people speaking out a bit about the, what is it they call it, the human suffering in Gaza, or of course, while we always welcome people to awaken, if that's the word. I don't know what the right word is I'm trying to find, but we always welcome people to join the right side, of course, but doing that without addressing the enormous harm, not from just being silent, but from actively working against and silencing and punishing activists who are just speaking up for common sense, then that should not be applauded whatsoever, because that's still moving within the frame of what is acceptable. And now it is acceptable to say this, okay, then I'll say this. That's not how you should navigate your morality.
Thank you, Elisa and Greta. First of all, I'm really sorry about what you went through. We all know that that's very common in Germany for BiPoC people, and it's absolutely unacceptable, and it really shows the moral decay of these people that I belong to. And what I just wanted to pick up on what Greta said, that the things these people say are actually so stupid. And this is one clue, right? If it doesn't make sense initially and from your gut, it actually doesn't make sense. You can trust your gut. And we are being told not to. And so I just really wanted to pick that up and point that out, because it's an important learning and a very important clue. And I wanted to pass on to Hebh, and could you share an example of something you experienced where we can see how this kind of gaslighting takes place for Palestinians who are speaking up and protesting against the immense violence their families are going through in an effort to stop the genocide and just protect their people?
Last week, I contemplated canceling this conversation, actually. Because why the fuck are we having a conversation when a genocide is going on? And honestly, and I'm sorry, I like, the reason I agreed is because speaking is better than not speaking. But I wanna frame this, I guess, non-angrily. But I'm just not going to do that. 50 members of my husband's family were murdered in Gaza. 4 people today, 4 of his cousins were murdered, being shot going to the aid distribution center that fucking Israel told them is safe to go to. And we all have all these conversations about, oh, you know, we don't hate a people, we have to have dignity for people, we have to, of course people, human beings have dignity. But one thing that is gaslighting to me is sort of being expected to not hate the Israeli soldiers that shot my cousins to begin with. What is expected of me? You know, gaslighting is of course a very apparent thing here, because not only do we have to, as Palestinians with family in Gaza, not only are we, you know, going through, you know,
at least me, witnessing my family go through the most like barbaric things a human can do to another, it's sort of like, all right, you know, this country is physically trying to manufacture my own emotions. Who I can hate, who I can't hate, who I can say, you know, is, what I can say, what I can't say. Yeah, your family was murdered, but where were they? Can you contextualize their murder? And I am trying to put myself in a position to never allow a state to dictate what I can feel or what I can't feel, what I can say or what I can't say, saying from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free or not. And look, like, I know this is like sort of uncomfortable, but you know, and I understand that for some people who are not introduced to conversations like this, and are not coming from a Palestinian background, and are not, you know, sort of aware. This is sort of provocative, and we have to speak to the other side, and we have to do this, and we have to do that. And it's incredibly exhausting to live in this country as a Palestinian. And you know, the common reaction that, you know, Germans say was, okay, why don't you go to Palestine? I'm freaking trying to, you know, like, I don't want to be here. Like, I could give a lot of examples of how I've been framed and how I've been slandered and attacked and how I've been excluded, but there is something, you know, really fundamental and I think crucial to this conversation. It's often people who understand the nature of this genocide feel that it's unique, right? Feel that, oh yeah, look, the whole world is watching where 50,000 people have been slaughtered. How can we allow this to go on? This hasn't happened in this way in history, but it has. And this is something that I really want people to understand. Genocides have happened historically, you know, a lot. In 2009, it was the Sri Lankan government against the Tamil people. You know, there's discrimination and persecution of people that is taking place consistently. And during World War II, it was against the Jewish population. There is nothing unique about murdering, you know, putting people in gas chambers, not feeding them. It's similar. And they want you to think that it's not similar. Dehumanization of a people is similar. Do not let them gaslight you into thinking otherwise. It's this concept, it's this idea that one type of person can be barbaric to a certain type of person. No, a Muslim person can persecute another. A person of color can persecute another. A Jewish person can persecute another. It doesn't matter about the physical identity, right? What is taking place currently, what's taking place in Palestine right now, has been repeated before. It has happened before. I might, you know, be slandered in saying I'm relativizing the Holocaust. That is actually against what I'm doing. I am contextualizing it in a way that you can apply to other people if you humanize the person. And what has taken place in Germany is the complete dehumanization of the Palestinian people. To a degree, we are not afforded emotions, thoughts, you know, we're not afforded to be able to breathe, actually. And what's interesting, right now is you see a sort of turn of the conversation. Yeah, we have to, the humanitarian suffering in Gaza. I'm being gaslit. I really feel like I'm going crazy. You know, they're so amazing at manufacturing consent to hate another person that I have to sometimes, I'm like questioning, like, okay, I'm like, you know, is this real? And they refuse to name who's causing the suffering. Or they're saying, you know, something that is consistently said, Hamas hides in hospitals, Hamas hides in homes, Hamas hides behind civilians. Okay, so if Netanyahu went inside of a building and then there was 1,000 people in the frickin' building, do you bomb the goddamn building? No, you don't bomb the building. You don't bomb the building, but here's the thing. Palestinians understand dignity of human life, and they are still trying to persevere despite the whole world and the whole, you know, colonial entities and Western powers stomping on their humanity. And I don't want to go on a rant about this and continue. Thank you, but I just sort of, I want you guys to understand that the only reason I'm here is because, again, talking, at least it's better than staying silent. But the reality is I'm not very happy to be here, not because I don't love all of you guys and appreciate the platform being able to speak my mind, but because it's incredibly disheartening to see 400 people sitting in a room when I don't see you all on the streets. And again, the severity of the situation of being in a genocide, of being, consistently bombarded with our own money, right, with our taxes. If you're in the United States, then I'm double complicit, being an American and also paying taxes here and paying taxes there. Our money is I have to use money because I guess maybe that sort of invokes a sort of reaction, but the real thing is you should speak out because humans are dying, not just because your money is going to it. So.
Thank you for being here and for sharing this with us. The gaslighting and the intense violence of always discrediting what you're going through is something I think that shocks many of us, also seeing how insane this discussion has become and how inhumane. And yeah, it's ridiculous to say that I'm sorry, of course. It doesn't do it justice at all. And thank you for being here, nonetheless. I want to pass on to Hadas and your story. You come from a family of Holocaust survivors, and I am horrified that you have had to experience the absurd and insulting situation that Germans have called you anti-Semitic when you were speaking up for human rights of Palestinian people, and criticizing the Israeli government and military. Could you share a story, an example of how that happened? I'm always struggling to wrap my head around the fact that this is actually a thing that's happening in this country, because it's so outrageous.
First, I was attacked by other Israelis, of course. A few years back, I was trying to create in 2019 a learning circle. I was so innocent. I came to Hamburg and I thought, let's relearn the history of Israel-Palestine. And I showed films and we read books, Edward Said, because I needed to learn the history, to relearn, and I joined with other people. And I was really attacked by some Israelis who live in Hamburg, and one of them called me an auto-anti-Semitic. And I thought, in the beginning I laughed, but then I thought, okay, that's brilliant, that's gaslighting. What the fuck are you talking about? Auto-anti-Semitic. Well, Freud would be like mind-fucked by this. And I understood where I'm getting into. But Israelis is one thing. I'm used to this, especially since the 7th of October. But Germans who gave me everything as a Jew here. I feel like so privileged to be Jewish in Germany. Promoted and always, they're throwing their red carpet to me. Wow, Jewish and Holocaust survivor family. I have 4 grandparents who survived this. And just because of coming, I would try to close a circle here. Just because of coming from this Holocaust surviving family, I am extra sensitive to the suffering of other people, especially my neighbors from across the fence, who are suffering the same thing my family and people have been through. This is so simple to understand. And Israelis, other Israelis who are completely blind, we cannot, they are just part of the same problem. And I want to say another thing if I don't get to it later. People in Germany like to say, yeah, it's horrible, but. There is no but. And talking about Netanyahu as the problem, like Israelis and Germans like to do, it's not understanding the problem. Okay? Now it's a crash course to the history of Israel and Palestine. The Zionist movement was to begin with a colonizer, a brutal one, and they did what they did just so the Jews would have a nation. And it's not new, people like me or the Jüdische Stimme that I'm part of and a lot of other organizations around the world who are Jewish, who say that's not the only way for the Jewish people to become a nation. It doesn't have to be in this way of killing, genociding, ethnically cleansing, colonizing in the past, occupying later, dehumanizing and humiliating the Palestinians. That's not the only way to have your nation. And we are trying to say that out loud. We want to keep our Jewishness and my and our values in a way that is respectful to our neighbors in Palestine if we are staying there and having to live together. It's as simple as that.
Thank you, Hadas. Now you know why we invited Hadas. I had goosebumps. She's such a powerful orator and explaining this through such a powerful lens. I think from the thread we are trying to create in terms of the narration, I would like to continue with you, Hebh, because I know you have been researching the phenomenon of the German Staatsräson for some time now, and it's a powerful example of willful denial, and it is also intertwined with the false accusations of anti-Semitism that are often weaponized sometimes by right-wing actors, but also others, to silence any criticism of state power. Could you share your thoughts and analysis around Staatsräson and where it has led to you?
Yeah, this is a big conversation, obviously a big topic, but I'll just give like a very sort of brief history and sort of what it means today. So in 2008, Angela Merkel, in front of the Israeli Knesset, sort of said the following: Israel's national security is Germany's reason of state. And the reason of state is a non-legally binding thing. I don't even know it's a thing. It's just like it's not even a policy, it's sort of an essence, right? It doesn't exist, but it exists. The reason of state is Germany's sort of, domestic policy and approach to Israel. And how the reason of state functions. How does Germany protect the national interests and the security of a foreign entity? How does that translate into everyday life? Well, actually, it's pretty systemic. So the reason of state can find itself nearly in every single institution inside Germany. And maybe this could be a mental exercise for you later on. You could search sort of any institution that exists in Germany and the word Israel. Literally, every single German institution, every single educational institution has connections to the state of Israel. In fact, there is literally a textbook commission that was created by the Israeli Education Ministry and the German Education Ministry to find out what is anti-Israel bias in German textbooks. And an example they gave was showing IDF soldiers next to like militarized zone and said this creates an image of Israel as an occupying force. It's called the DISC Textbook Commission. But it's not just that. Again, whenever you sort of invoke what the reason of state is, they tell you it's not legally binding. But essentially what it is that every sort of minister, every political representative, Olaf Scholz, after October 7th, reiterated
reason of state. This is the Deutsche Staatsräson. So this is why it's a very, for me, it's best described as a sort of essence, because it shows how Germany's committed to Zionism, how it's committed to the state of Israel under the guise of memory culture. And in my opinion, and in my analysis, Germany has never truly denazified. I mean, that's a historical fact that it hasn't denazified. But what the reason of state was that it was a convenient political ideology that the state of Germany adopted to rid themselves of the sins of the Holocaust. Now, how did they do that? They don't do real meaningful work to combat anti-Semitism, go into post-colonial literature, figure out anti-racism, talk about their past, their colonial past in Africa. That is how you combat the essence of dehumanization. They didn't do that. What they did, though, is they uplifted and secured and cooperated with the state of Israel, adopted a policy of Zionism within every single political, educational state institution to essentially give them an out, to re-enter the world stage after World War II. That is what the reason of state is. And the problem is, Palestinians, right, okay, so the reason of state, I'll repeat it. The reason of state was essentially this out for Germany to sort of get away from their past, right? The problem with that, though, is that the largest Palestinian diaspora outside the Middle East and South America is in Germany. So that's a problem, right? In the 80s, sorry if I'm ranting, please cut me off if I'm going too much. In the 80s, during the Lebanese civil war, Palestinians came to Germany as refugees. They sought political asylum. However, Germany didn't see them as political refugees. They saw them as stateless people. So what happens when you see someone as a stateless person is they wanted to deport them. So all of these refugees came, thousands of refugees came. They wanted to deport them, right? But they couldn't because Lebanon didn't want them back. So Germany gave them something called toleration status, Duldung status. And what that meant is that you could stay in this country, but eventually we want you out. And so Palestinians, a lot of them living in Berlin, would put their suitcases in the corner of their rooms, waiting this deportation order that basically never came. So they lived in Germany and are still here today. A lot of them are living in what is called the Arab streets in Berlin, right? Germany created a problem. They didn't want these people to integrate. And so what did the people do? They created a sort of identity amongst themselves, right? They didn't have papers to work. They didn't have the ability to go to school and have the same opportunities as other Germans. And so they created a community among themselves. In Germany, now this is a problem because now you have really proud Palestinians that don't identify with Germany, right? And so the concept was to criminalize them as much as possible, and that is what we're seeing today.
Thank you. That's a very important and powerful thing to understand for us Germans. And thank you for pointing out the lack of denazification. I want to stress that again. That is something that I research and tackle a lot in my project. And it's actually extremely shocking that that never happened. And the way that happened was so superficial and performative. And of course has not been effective in any way. One thing I can hear when I hear all you speaking, something that comes up in common of everyone talking is we're seeing a commitment of the German mainstream to really sort of look away and not commit and be like really a lack of courage and real opportunism. And I remember when I learned about the Holocaust in school that being an opportunist was one of the biggest things I took away as being extremely harmful and extremely dangerous. And so the silence and the opportunism in order to sort of get your advantages, ridiculous advantages as human rights are being killed off around the planet, that is something that concerns us a lot. And I wanted to address you, Greta, next. Hi. Because you are someone who has been speaking up for justice and the climate justice since you were 15 years old. And how would you explain the majority of people staying silent or inactive in the face of human rights abuses, as well as the impending climate catastrophe, which eventually hurts us all? Do you have any suggestions for us on how we can motivate the silent/inactive people for actions in Germany in the face of the immense gaslighting and silencing against activists in this country?
If I had the answer to that, then I assure you we would not be sitting here. But yeah, thank you. I mean, I think, first of all, we need to see the climate crisis and the genocide and occupation currently in Palestine as just, they are very, very interlinked. There is no way of distinguishing them. You cannot speak up for climate justice and not speak out for justice for Palestine. Effectively, the climate crisis is a symptom of a system that is not just failing to keep us safe, but actively designed and rigged to be built upon over extraction and the oppression of and marginalization of the majority of the world's population just so that a very fortunate few can continue making unimaginable amounts of money. Basically, that's the core root of the climate crisis. And we are seeing that both in ecological crises, ecocides, genocides. It's the complete lack of respect and disregard of human and planetary well-being, and just thinking that this fairy tale of eternal economic growth needs to be upheld at any costs, that at any cost we must maintain this system just to be able to generate more profit and to ensure geopolitical power. And I think that's a key thing that we need to understand, that whatever we want to call this system, whether it is imperialism, capitalism, patriarchy, it has many names, many faces. It is hurting almost everyone. And currently, even if you are so selfish that you are not moved to action by seeing the mass slaughtering of so many human beings in Palestine, if you are not moved to tears seeing the countless videos that we see every time we open up our phones of parents burying their children, if that does not activate you, if you are so selfish, then how do you expect a world that allows this to happen, that allows this genocide to happen, and continue funding and supporting it? How do you expect that world to be there for you when you need it? And how do you expect that world to take a few steps back and focus on ecology to be able to continue maintaining our civilization as we know it? Because currently we are sacrificing the very basic life-supporting systems that we all depend on to live. And I think a key in order to activate people is to get that basic understanding that what we are talking about is existential crises and escalated global emergencies that are reinforcing each other, that are very much interlinked, and to understand that solidarity is a verb, and we cannot sit and wait for someone to take action, because currently international law, all international institutions and organizations, government, there is no one we can turn to because they are all failing. As I said, it seems like they are more or less built up on this need to oppress. So there is no one that we can turn to. which is very, very scary. The world has been betraying people like Palestinians, but also all colonized people and oppressed people all over the world, whether it is in Sudan, Congo, Kurdistan, Kashmir, countless of cases where we can see this play out. So since there is no one that we can turn to, it more or less falls on us as humans, as citizens of, in many privileged cases, citizens of democratic countries. We have a voice where we can speak out without risking our lives or our freedoms, and that the fact that many of us do not have to wake up every morning and fight for our people's right to survive is a sign that we are extremely privileged. And with that privilege today, in these extremely defining times where what we are doing right now is determining the fate of millions or billions of people currently and for all future generations to come, that privilege comes with an enormous responsibility.
Thank you, Greta. Those are very important points. So we have prepared a lot of questions for everyone. Obviously, the time is not enough. So I'm going through everything, like what makes sense, what's most important. And of course, you're invited to also talk to each other and have questions too. But of course, I have a lot prepared, too much. I want to go more like 20 minutes more and then open up to the audience too, right? So that we just think about then when you take the next questions to be brief. That was actually pretty good, what you did now. It was pretty brief. But I just wanted to give one to Hadas. Can't really decide which one is more important, but let's go with this anti-Semitism conference because we're being gaslit through this anti-Semitism claims all the time. Or that has happened in Israel, and you could talk a little bit about that.
I actually wanted also to continue from the previous point about anti-Semitism because recently I started seeing this obsession actually with anti-Semitism in Germany, especially that it's so counterproductive that it's like hindering dealing with the real problem, and it's very smart from the Western societies, the Zionist Western societies, to do that, because then we have to fight to say, no, it's not anti-Semitic, instead of talking about what shall we do about the Palestinian hungry children. That's what I want to do. I mean, just stop with this rhetorical game. And a few things that I thought recently about anti-Semitism. First of all, why do we have our own term? That's anti-Semitic, maybe, to say that Jews has a certain kind of racism. I don't want that. If someone hates me for being Jewish, it's just a fucking racist. I want to stop this anti-Semitism thing. I'm offering ideas for those of you who go higher than and can change some policies. Yeah, that's one idea. Another idea is sometimes I feel that this blaming me for being anti-Semitic because I'm criticizing the Israeli government, and even the Israeli people, by the way, who are supporting what the government is doing. Are you Germans trying to turn me to be like you have been? Because actually by stopping me fighting for the justice of the Palestinian people, and there's a lot of work to do, by telling me that it's anti-Semitic, it actually turns. Sometimes it feels a bit, would you feel better if I would just be a Nazi like the rest of the Israelis? Then you would feel comfortable. That's the way to go. And by Nazis, I mean, it's different. I know that it's different. Times are different, technology is different. Now we can watch the genocide online. In the 40s, you couldn't. You could only smell the flesh of the burning Jews and other minorities. By the way, it wasn't only Jews in the crematorium. There's a very good film about it, by the way, the Zone of Interest. I really recommend to understand how I feel from the side of the perpetrators, what it means to be a perpetrator or be belonging to a group of perpetrating other people's lives on such an extreme way. There's nothing left for me to do than doing everything to stop this, to try to change the discourse, especially in Germany. There's so much work to do to fight against this anti-Semitism blame and how do you say Vorwurf, like accusations, instead of talking about the real problem. And I wanted also, still shortly, to connect it also to the climate change, because in my research, we are researching climate change communication, actually. And since the 7th of October, I say it now in brackets, I couldn't do much regarding climate because I was too busy with the genocide in Palestine. But I do see a very strong connection, and that's about the public discourse. Because in order for us, Hebh, I agree with you, we should all be actually on the streets. But in order to be on the streets, we have to also focus also on the discourse, which so many people are just confused or just not understanding. The climate change problem has also suffered from this false balance that the media really pushed through the years, because it's known already since the 70s and 80s, scientists were unified about the climate change problem. Not only that there is climate change, but that it's man-made. And from strong corporations around the world who could lose, it wasn't lucrative to talk about climate change, so they hired their own scientists and created some kind of a false debate about it, as if there is a question whether there is climate change or not and whether it is man-made. And that's a complete false balance that owes to the media owes its side to it, I think. And I felt a bit like when people in Germany, I talk about the Palestine and Israel history, Germans say, no, wait, but it's complicated. And once you know the history, it's not complicated. It's not. The history of Israel-Palestine, the way I understand it, and I think many other people, is not complicated. It's in the book, in many books, actually. It was colonized, people were ethnically cleansed, and so on. I won't tell you the history, and I hope you know it. And therefore, it's not complicated. What makes it look like it's complicated is Germany's schuld or guilt or whatever they play around it. And I really think if Germans want to help Jewish people, please stop with this rhetorical game, which is just hindering addressing the problem. Look what happens, Germans. You are now compliciting in another genocide. That's what's happening. Thank you.
I think this is a good moment to give back to you, Hebh, to talk about what responsibility do you think the German media has in this moment as we are experiencing extreme forms of gaslighting through those outlets, and you're a journalist, so we thought it's especially interesting to hear your professional as well as your personal perspective on it.
The German media calls me a so-called journalist in quotation marks whenever they reference me, so or self-proclaimed journalist. The German media is something in particular. I think, I really have analyzed different German, different media, different newspapers across different Western countries, and by far, Germany is the most complicit. Something that I have noticed, there's a relationship between the German media and the state that is It operates in other countries, but in particular in Germany, it's a very homogenous relationship. And what I mean by that, so let's take an example of a Bild article publishing the professors who wanted to support the students and saying they shouldn't be brutally beaten, imprisoned for, peacefully protesting a genocide. And they slandered them as, Hamas professors, or, and all their names and their biographies and whatever that is, a hit piece. And this is a tabloid, essentially. And I'm not sure if it was Bild or Spiegel or whatever it is. But what happened is that the German state, in their resolution, they wanted to write a resolution, make it into law. They literally referenced the same hit piece article to sort of make their point that anti-Semitism was happening on university campuses. So no critical thinking. It doesn't exist in the room, right? So usually what happens is that media is critical of state figures and politicians, and they may be in other issues, but when it comes to this, when it comes to Palestine, when it comes to the genocide, the state media and political figures work hand in hand. There's no critical components involved. And something that is very peculiar about how the German media functions. Usually, even complicit media like the BBC in the UK, they still, to have a sense of legitimacy, they still interview Palestinian perspectives, they still have critical voices, they release documentaries that still try to talk about the situation, about the occupation, about settlers, whatever it is. They try to still maintain a critical voice because it's also interesting to get the other side. That's what an ethical journalist does. But in Germany, they don't go to the other side. They have not gone to Palestinians and having them speak on platforms and on TV shows to try to get the other perspective and really engage with the arguments. No, what they do instead is that they work as tabloids. So German media, maybe they're hiding in the room looking for their next hit piece, or they're going to a protest and specifically take photos of individual activists and say, oh, look, this is the pro-Palestinian scene. It's being led by this, this, and this. Yesterday, ZDF released a documentary about Hamas in Germany. And literally, the documentary is about how this one guy goes to a protest, and this one guy controls all the activists in Germany. I swear to God, there was no one critical evidence that was presented in the entire 30-minute, 1-hour documentary, whatever they released. This is such a facade. I mean, I'm a journalist, and I think it's interesting sometimes to go and interview the police or interview someone else just so I can get their perspective and say, I spoke to them. That's what an ethical person does. That's what an ethical journalist does. But Germany, they don't have even the desire to do that because it's actually not necessary. The status quo and how Germany operates and how Germans who support the genocide, how they operate is that the status quo is law. Anyone who critiques the status quo does not even get to have a voice, does not even get to be presented, does not even get to engage in their arguments because they're so ridiculous. Otherwise, how is their position not the status quo? That's how they think. They think that the truth is based in law, apparently. And when it's not based in law, right, then we'll create a law to criminalize it. So, yeah, it's an unfortunate... It's an unfortunate situation, and this is my last thing I'll say. The thing that has unfortunately happened with me is I'm making a documentary about the reason of state, and I wanted to show some of the footage at an event actually in Berlin, and the police literally did not allow me to. They literally did not allow me to show a piece of my journalistic work, obviously because of who I am as a Palestinian. And if I'm a Palestinian, I can't be a journalist. I can't show a perspective because that perspective is entirely skewed and is subject to harassment and is justified of being silenced.
Thank you. I think it's especially important what you are pointing out about the strategic and decade-long silencing of Palestinian voices. Basically, ever since post-World War II, they knew after the creation of Israel, in order for that to go through and to go well in terms of saving or reestablishing the reputation of Germany on the world stage, that Palestinian voices had to be cut out of the discourse. And I only learned this after October 7th, because I was like late to the game. And for me, it was such a crucial understanding to see that this has been going on forever, and that it showed me how deeply authoritarian Germany still is. And that is very, very worrisome if you really look at what is going on there. This is a question that Hadas put into the box. It was about if you could consult a German politician, a political representative, what should Germany do to be or move towards the right side of history?
I want to speak about like the concept of transformative justice and something like how can we actually, after all this damage which is done and happening, like it continues, of course. And also, if we could talk about the Nakba, if we talk about like the displacement of the Palestinian people, which happened over and over again, it is continuing. It never ended. Like for the people who don't know, maybe like 75% to 80% of all Palestinian people were expelled from their hometowns in 1948 and before and around that age. And then it continues to, like Palestinians are being displaced again and again and again, and that's why what we also see in Gaza. Like in Gaza is also like 80% of the people who lived actually there on the 7th of October are refugees. They are not from Gaza. They were also displaced to there. So I think this is something which we have to understand if we think about Germany's responsibility also to Palestinian people, because Hebh perfectly talked about Staatsräson and how the memory culture is so absurd in Germany when Palestinians are not happening there. Like Palestinians doesn't seem to exist. Also, if you learn in Germany, if you go to school and learn about the Holocaust, like I've been also to those memory cultural events, and we were there like 4 times. We learned about the Holocaust 4 times, and we did never talk about the Palestinian people and what happened with them afterward. Like it was just, then Israel was created, and then so they had a safe place. But it is the most dangerous place for Jewish people to be in Israel. And of course, you have to expect that people will resist if you take away their homes, as you said, and you have to expect hatred also. And I think this continues to go wrong in Germany. We're not talking about the German responsibility towards Palestinian people when it comes to Nakba, when it comes to today, when it comes to the complicity, to also like delivering them with weapons and everything they need. But also when we think about all those things, we talked about gaslighting in Germany and the people who start to speak, who certainly have a mouth and an opinion on the humanitarian catastrophe they talk about in Gaza, as you mentioned. I think it's very important that we also have to say and have to expect that they acknowledge the harm they did. They acknowledged how they profited from this, from also silencing us, from throwing us out of their rooms, out of their spaces, out of the debate, like actually. And then they built their businesses on that, on this complicity for months, for years. And now they try to speak and try to have a face like human, and treat people like human beings, but they are not. Well, they're actually not, because they don't politicize it. They speak about it like it's a humanitarian catastrophe, which happened to be there, and not talk about the perpetrator, as you said, not talk about Israel, not talk about the colonialism which is happening still, and which is the problem. It's not the relationship crisis. It's not like a relationship crisis and we have to just have a dialogue with the people, and they just have to see how how they are also human beings, the Israelis and also the Palestinians. Where does the hate come from? Well, from colonization, maybe. this is why I think those vague.
Oh, he is asking about the Freedom Flotilla and what happened with the boat.
Yeah, so after decades upon decades of occupation and ethnic cleansing, and after the 2-month complete siege and blockade of all humanitarian aid into Gaza, the Freedom Flotilla coalition was going to make yet another attempt to sail there and do their part to try to break the siege and continue to keep the promise to Palestinians to do everything in our power to demand justice and accountability for Israel's actions. After 2 months of complete blockade, that boat was going to sail off the coast of Malta, where many people from all over the world, including me, were going to board the ship and try to make that voyage an act of solidarity. The boat got bombed twice, drone strike twice, on international waters off the coast of Malta after it had been illegally deflagged. And all evidence strongly suggests that it was Israel who did it, even though media seems to be incapable of mentioning that, of course, as always. So that is yet another extremely clear example of the complete disregard of international law, of basic human rights, of people using their right to sail on international waters to deliver desperately needed aid, aid that has been actively blocked by Israel. So that's what happened with the Gaza Freedom Flotilla. It was, what date is it? Almost a month ago. But the Freedom Flotilla has had many boats, dozens of boats trying to do the same thing for a very long time now, and it will sail again in a couple of days, actually, because the moment we stop trying, even when the odds are against us, is when we lose our humanity. Yeah.
Thank you, Greta.
One of you talked about the inability to kind of hear the other person's side in conversation, and I was wondering if some of you was doing like research on where this could come from in the like German history, or like, yes. That's it.
I think some of us are referring to this insistent need by the Germans to sort of have a both sides, try to have a neutral sort of approach to what's taking place in Palestine. And so I guess a lot of us were talking about this concept of hearing both sides, of if you are a Palestinian, you can't possibly you're too invested, you can't be neutral. And I think the idea of what we were trying to say is that this so-called neutrality is a facade. It's a facade for something bigger. It's a facade that is, masks, complicity. And so really what they're saying is only a German person, or, in this case, a Zionist actually, can really tell the true history of what's taking place to the Palestinian people. And this, of course, can come from a majority of political, historical concepts, but really to me is where does it come from? Is after World War II there was never a consistent approach of anti-racism, actually, because what you learn is that it is the people who are experiencing the worst atrocities that a person can experience are the best tellers of history.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. Oh, you want to answer?
I just wanted to connect to this shortly because it's another point that is that I bring my Jewishness again to say, and this Holocaust descendants, that if it's something I had to see the similarities, because people say you cannot compare what happens to the Palestinians in the Holocaust. We have to compare. We have to compare. And of course, it's not exactly the same. And being so careful about it just makes it worse. And if there is, we can talk about the similarities and we can talk about the differences. The main difference is that the Holocaust was 6 years and the Palestinian Nakba is 77 years and counting. That's one difference. Another difference is that the Jewish Holocaust was acknowledged. If anybody would ever tell me that what happened to my grandparents did not happen, or that they just exaggerate, or that it's their narrative, I don't know what I would do to that person. But it's a whole society, no? So completely denying the Nakba, which is very strong in Israel and in other Zionist environment, is one of the most humiliating things I think you can do to oppressed people. First of all, let's acknowledge the Nakba. And of course, let's acknowledge this genocide and millions of other things that it is, because genocide is really like an understatement from what I have been seeing, and we've all been seeing that is done to human beings, not to mention children.
I think especially if you're living in Germany and have learned about the history and about Holocaust, but also the genocidal colonial history Hebh was talking about, that we're lack of knowledge, and if you really want to learn something like that, I think good remembrance doesn't sacralize the past, doesn't make it to a holy thing which cannot be talked about, not analyzed and looked for things which we notice are happening again. So we are not trivializing it when we compare single things which happened there. And I think this is very important because it has to be made usable for the present. Remembrance does not have another function. It has also the function, of course, acknowledging, but also we have to make it usable for the present as a compass to guide us. So it helps us also to ask, what kind of society do we want to build? What future are we looking to live for? What future are we trying to live in? And this is, I think, very important to understand that the moral duty of Germany cannot be tied to a single state. The moral duty of Germany must be tied to human dignity itself.
Yes, I wildly agree with everything you just said. Thank you.
Just very quickly, I wanted to ask, I also struggle with, because the approach in Germany is so anti-intellectual and it's anti-curious and it's very bad faith, I don't know how do you engage people like that, because they're not, but it's also important to engage them because that's I guess how you change minds. So I don't know if you have any wisdom on that in general, and also maybe specifically you, Emma, what was it that kind of opened your eyes to it? Because I know must be similarly indoctrinating to grow up in Israel. Like, I just don't know how to even get an in there. Like, yeah.
Yeah, there are different stories of what woke me up in a way, but I think it was just being very sensitive during the years, and I was told all kinds of stories in school, and the problem was that I was a very good student, so I took in everything they gave. And there are so many lies in the way Israelis learn about the history of themselves. But maybe, luckily, I always felt that there is some black hole in all of this. And you know, slowly you grow up as a kid, and then I start seeing in the little city I grew up in some ruins of some old, Arab-looking house. Nobody talks about it. We pass by it. Looks so beautiful to me because I love history and I want to get to know myself and my identity. So it's like big millions of question marks that are all around, and you have to just be sensitive a bit to figure something is not told here to me. Well, what's going on? And when I was in the army in Israel, it's obligatory to be in the army. And I was still too innocent to understand what it means to be a soldier. My mother claims that I refused to go to the army, apart from if I would be a teacher, because that's what I wanted to be, a teacher, and I was a teacher. So I was a teacher in the army, and I remember that my supervisor told me, because I worked with youth, like margined youth, outside of school hours. And they told me one of your jobs is not only to help them with math and Hebrew and whatever, you need to help them go into the army, like sell it to them, you know? And that felt so wrong because so many of those young people, some of them from abuse and from all kinds of stories, I felt like I knew what it meant to go to the army and do the training and having to shoot an M16, which is just traumatic in itself. So I need to convince these young people to go to the army no matter what. And that was my first minor activism, that between me and me, I knew that I'm not going to convince these people to go to the army. And I did other things. But that was just the beginning of understanding that there is a huge system around me that really dictates what is right and wrong, and the rest is, as I told, about art learning and history. And
I just want to sort of have a very short response to this. My answer to you would be, you don't actually. Because what history says is that you don't liberate yourself by speaking to your oppressor, you liberate yourself by demanding it. And I just want to give a very brief example. I mean, I'm very connected to what Black people went through in the United States, and I'm very connected to what happened during the Jim Crow era. Of course, it was a continuation of America's history of slavery, and what has happened is that the people, the activists, they did actions every single day demanding their own dignity. And one thing that Angela Davis, has said is that change, it doesn't seem malleable. German society doesn't seem like a society that could change. But in fact, what has happened after the Jim Crow era, after segregation of an entire people, right, is that it was suddenly changed. Right? It was changed within someone's lifetime. And so change is actually a malleable form. Society is more malleable than you think, and your interaction with society is more malleable than you think, but you will hinder yourself if you try to convince a German person that you're worthy of becoming a human. Instead, you demand that they see you as a human, and you fight for that even if they are never fully convinced.
My question is, in recent days, some German politicians, Friedrich Merz, people from the Greens, from SPD, suddenly slightly turned on Israel after enabling actively the genocide for 19 months and not taking any responsibility for that. But how do people who stand in solidarity with Palestine, how we should react to this? Should we ignore it? Is there some momentum to push for more, for freedom for Palestine in this?
No, they're doing it for their own self-interest, so they could look at history and say that, no, they actually did stand up against Israel when all of this is clear in the foreseeable future. Germany is a democracy. It's a liberal government, right? But how can you be a liberal government? How can you function? How can you continue on, right? As we know their history of the Holocaust and already enabling a past genocide, how could they continue on if they're seen in the history books of supporting another? Aren't like militarily, politically, financially. It's, of course, a self-fulfilled action that they're doing. It's not any material change, because the reality is they're still providing political, financial, and military support to Israel, right? So it's not something that changes our courses of action. It doesn't change what we're doing in the movement. Police are still brutalizing people every single day on Berlin streets. And if it was true, if what they're saying is true, that the Palestinian life in Gaza is worth, the humanitarian suffering is worth stopping, then they wouldn't be brutalizing people who are saying the same exact thing. No, what this means is it's a political cover in front of the international world.
I would expect the next step, if Germany is really serious with their politicians, which I'm not so optimistic about it, but I agree with Hebh. A meaningful thing that a German politician can do is to tell another Israeli leader, whomever, to stand up and tell the Palestinian people, we acknowledge the Nakba. Let's start from that. There was never been, in the 77 years since the establishment of the State of Israel, one single leader who stood up and said, we acknowledge the Palestinian people, their history, their culture, the Nakba that we did to them. Not to mention to say, we're sorry. And that's the kind of politics I would like to see, and that's strong, is that not acknowledging what was done to you and always doubting and presenting you as non-human, half-human, inventing stories that you have a narrative and not like a real story, is that this humiliation, this is what kills people. And I disagree to that, and I would like to use the strength of the German politicians, as they claim to be a really good friend to Israel and say, stand up and acknowledge your past. 77 years, it's almost a whole century. It's unacceptable.
Yeah, I think it's something like, I just want to add something, like it's not only about the past, as we know, as we talked about, like it's happening today, so I think we should not be friends with Israel and not also try to help them understanding their past, because I think they do it intentionally. They do it very much intentionally, and every politician and we get it, they're making it so much clearer in their statements. Not only Netanyahu, so many fascist politicians were proudly fascist politicians in this government. They're making it so much clear that what they plan, a greater Israel without Palestinians, the erasure, total erasure of the Palestinian people, and like taking the land. So I don't think that will work. I think we have to dismantle the whole system.
I have actually a proposal, because I heard it from Greta, thanks for mentioning it. If we are talking about Nächstenliebe and, like, you know, fighting or doing a revolution against the whole mess, then I would really like at least in three breaths to also hear from other countries, like not only Palestine, also Congo, also Sudan, and I bet so many other people have other countries too. Just saying.
Of revolution, but so just to sort of answer your question, I have to say, like, I'm a very cynical person, but something about the Palestinian people that is sort of instilled in us is this concept of steadfastness, sumud, right? And it's the idea that everything we sort of do has a purpose, and the concept of just living or surviving or whatever it may be is an act of resistance in and of itself. Of course, this doesn't apply to us living here in Germany, but what it is and what I sort of want to say by this is that although the future seems very bleak, how we interact with the people within our sort of within our circles of influence is incredibly important, and something that I find very doable is being able to talk about the injustices of this world wherever you are, right? And it doesn't, to be honest, it doesn't require revolution. We say that protest doesn't work, but the reality is it's just because not enough of us are on the streets. It's not that protests don't work. No, protest movements do work. Protest movements influence policy, influence how people talk, influence how people perceive a specific issue. And this is true for all sorts of types of movements. But the reality in Germany is that not enough of us are talking about these issues within our circles of interest. Right? We're not talking about it with our neighbors. We're not talking about it at work. We're not talking about it in school or in the university. And then we ask, oh, what can we do? This doesn't work like that. What happens is that we do what we can in the spheres of influence that we have.
How all of this shit is not happening, of course, in Palestine and this region, but everywhere around the world. As you mentioned, there are many genocides, and there is the Congolese genocide, and there is the Sudanese genocide, and there were genocides in this history, like in this decade also, in the last decade, when you think about the Yazidis, I don't know how to call it in English, but the so-called Islamic State and their genocide on the Yazidi people was also one of the greater genocides which happened in the last decade. So we have to acknowledge that, of course, all those oppression systems are connected together. Like Israel also invents so much surveillance stuff and weapons and ships it around the world, delivers it to other oppressors around the world, and this oppresses all of us. So all of us have to work, of course, we have to organize and try to make a revolution against this imperialist capitalist system, because this is oppressing every person around the world.
I just want to say something really briefly about this in particular, because it's something that I have grappled with for a while. When I was a freshman in college, I was talking about Palestine because, I'm Palestinian, but a Sudanese brother sort of very confrontationally came up to me and said, oh, why don't you talk about Sudan? And I was very defensive. But the reality is my response should have been at the time, in my ignorant freshman year self, freshman is first year, sorry, Germany. What my response should have been was, how could I uplift and amplify your cause? And something that, Greta's a very humble person, and she doesn't toot her own horn, and she doesn't sort of talk about her own experiences a lot, but I learned what solidarity means through her.
because something that I've learned is how do I respond when people ask for my help, right? Because I don't want to take up space in Sudanese, in Sudanese circles or Congolese circles or Kashmiri circles. I don't want to be a spokesperson for someone else's cause. But if someone is specifically saying, I need you to uplift my cause because you have visibility, it is now your responsibility to do so. And that type of solidarity I literally learned from her, even though she's very humble, but truly I think this person embodies what solidarity is, because it's not just you center something around Palestine, you center something around, whatever it is, right? You don't say, oh, because we should care about it because it's all connected to Palestine. No, we should care about it because human beings are literally being genocided, killed, and wherever it is. And something that the Palestine movement has taught me living in the United States is that Black people in the United States and Palestinian people, Palestine's histories are so interconnected, literally because of how these empires function. And brutality and violence and dehumanization is a consistent across states, and something we should consistently be reminded of, and thank you for the reminder.
We thank you to everyone. We thank you for being here. We thank all of you for your support and for coming with an open mind and open heart. It was very important to gather, and we have to keep pushing. I think that's clear. And a lot of responsibility lies on us, just the people. Yeah.